Hello travelers, let's delve into a countdown of the top 10 countries where Americans are not welcome in 2024. Before we get into the top 10 countries where Americans are not welcome in 2024, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more content. Our list begins with Russia. With the recent conflict involving the Russian invasion of Ukraine, visiting Russia has become virtually inaccessible for Americans. Even before this turmoil, crossing the Russian border was a cumbersome process. Visa issuance is strictly prior to arrival, necessitating an invitation letter from a resident. The visa application itself is extensive, requiring details of travel history, education, employment, and affiliations. Obtaining a valid visa involves navigating through bureaucratic hurdles. The Russian government upholds a stringent and intricate visa system for foreigners entering, passing through, or residing within the Russian Federation. Failure by a U.S. citizen to adhere to Russian visa regulations could result in arrest, penalties, or expulsion. If a U.S. citizen traveler overstays their visa, Russian authorities may detain them, potentially leaving them stranded for up to 20 days until local authorities issue an exit visa. Next on the list is Bhutan. Nestled between India and China, Bhutan presents challenges for American tourists due to the absence of any diplomatic representation. Securing a visa necessitates engagement with tour agencies, limiting visa availability. While the application process is relatively straightforward, the reliance on tour operators curtails the influx of visitors, promising a more exclusive experience. Next on the list is Iran. Long-standing tensions between the U.S. and Iran led to a ban on American citizens entering the country, although this restriction has since been lifted. Nonetheless, travelers must navigate a series of procedures, including obtaining a travel authorization number and a visitor visa. Solo travel within Iran is prohibited, requiring tourists to coordinate with guides for visa acquisition and travel arrangements. India, renowned for its rich cultural experiences, requires meticulous visa procurement for American travelers. Whether for work or leisure, acquiring a visa demands extensive documentation, including employer letters and trip specifics. While tourism visas may be somewhat easier to obtain, detailed planning remains essential. There are many different languages and dialects spoken in India, which might make it difficult for visitors to communicate, particularly in rural areas where English competence may be low. For some places or activities, obtaining permits and negotiating bureaucratic procedures for Americans can take a lot of time, and overcoming bureaucratic obstacles can be difficult in India. Then Turkmenistan. Turkmenistan has one of the most restrictive visa policies in the world, and travel, in most cases, is only possible by joining a guided tour lasting the entire duration of your time in the country. It is one of the least visited countries in the world due to difficulties in the past to obtain visas and the country's isolationist policy. Tourism is not a priority for the government, and you are likely to be closely observed by the authorities. Up next is Eritrea. Similar to Turkmenistan and some other countries, Eritrea mandates a government-sanctioned invitation letter for U.S. visitors. This invitation letter serves as an essential document for visa application and entry into the country. Without it, attempting to obtain a visa, particularly for tourist purposes, can be challenging. The visa application process for Eritrea typically involves submitting the necessary documentation to the nearest Eritrean embassy or consulate. This documentation usually includes a completed visa application form, passport-sized photos, a valid passport with at least 6 months validity remaining, proof of accommodation arrangements in Eritrea, evidence of sufficient funds to cover the duration of the stay, and the government-sanctioned invitation letter. It's important for American citizens planning to visit Eritrea to adhere strictly to the formal tourist visa application process and provide all required documents. Attempting to bypass the requirement for the invitation letter or relying on transit visas may prove futile and result in visa denial or entry refusal. Additionally, travelers should allow sufficient time for the visa application process, as it can be laborious and time-consuming. It's advisable to begin the application process well in advance of the intended travel dates to ensure all requirements are met and the visa is obtained in time for the trip. Overall, while the visa application process for Eritrea may be complex and rigorous, adhering to the formal requirements, including obtaining the government-sanctioned invitation letter, offers a more assured method of entry for American citizens. While less familiar to Americans, Eritrea imposes rigorous visa procedures, requiring patience and thorough documentation. Beyond standard forms, applicants must furnish flight proof, bank statements, and a persuasive plea document, often referencing local contacts. Despite recent relaxation, navigating Eritrea's entry requirements remains challenging. It's important to note that visa requirements and application processes can change, so it's advisable for American citizens intending to travel to Eritrea to check the latest visa requirements and instructions from the nearest Eritrean embassy or consulate well in advance of their planned travel dates. Additionally, consulting the U.S. Department of State's travel advisories for Eritrea is recommended to stay informed about any safety or security concerns. Another one is Cuba. Decades-old trade embargoes restrict official American tourism in Cuba, although travel under specific categories is permitted. Obtaining a Cuba tourist card is essential, albeit challenging to convert U.S. currency in country. Restrictions on purchases further complicate the visitor experience. Financial transactions and the use of credit cards have been restricted for Americans visiting Cuba, requiring them to bring cash and navigate a different banking system. Despite recent easing of travel restrictions, Americans still encounter challenges related to limited infrastructure, internet access, and differences in cultural norms and expectations. Furthermore, navigating the evolving political relationship between the United States and Cuba adds another layer of complexity for American travelers to consider when planning their visit. Saudi Arabia. Tensions between the United States and Saudi Arabia, particularly in the aftermath of events like the September 11th attacks and concerns about human rights issues in Saudi Arabia, have sometimes led to diplomatic strains and uncertainties regarding travel advisories. Security concerns in the region, including the threat of terrorism and regional conflicts, have also made some Americans hesitant to visit Saudi Arabia. Historically elusive for American tourists, Saudi Arabia has recently begun extending visitation rights to various countries, including the USA. However, visa issuance remains subject to change, reflecting evolving diplomatic dynamics under Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's leadership. Then Iraq. Deteriorating relations between the US and Iraq underscore the challenges of personal travel to the country. Visa applications demand comprehensive documentation, including passports and a detailed purpose statement. Additionally, American visitors to Iraq may face cultural and logistical challenges, including language barriers and differences in customs and norms. Unpredictable embassy decisions and security concerns further complicate the process. The U.S. Department of State advises against travel to Iraq for U.S. citizens due to concerns including terrorism, kidnapping, armed conflict, civil unrest, and limited support capacity from Mission Iraq for U.S. citizens. Despite these challenges, some Americans may still travel to Iraq for specific purposes such as business, journalism, or humanitarian work. However, travelers are strongly advised to research and assess the risks carefully before visiting Iraq, and to follow any travel advisories and safety guidelines issued by their government. Another country is North Korea. North Korea has historically maintained strict controls on tourism and travel to the country, including for Americans. The North Korean government operates guided tours for foreign visitors, including Americans, but these tours are tightly controlled and heavily regulated. Visitors are typically only allowed to visit certain approved locations and are accompanied by government-assigned guides at all times. The North Korean government often portrays Americans as enemies due to the long-standing political tensions between North Korea and the United States. While American citizens are technically permitted to visit North Korea under certain circumstances, such as organized tours, the North Korean government's portrayal of Americans as hostile may create a challenging and potentially risky environment for American tourists. Additionally, the U.S. Department of State travel strongly advises against travel to North Korea for American citizens due to the serious risk of arrest and long-term detention under North Korea's strict legal system. as well as the absence of diplomatic relations and limited consular assistance available to Americans in case of emergencies. State emphasizes the critical importance of avoiding travel to North Korea for American citizens, prioritizing their safety and well-being.